Pokemon fans, Tamashii here. One of my most requested topics to make a tutorial for is IV breeding. For a long time, IVs, or individual values, have been one of the most confusing concepts to explain and grasp for trainers, and many don't even understand how they can be influenced at all. Luckily in X and Y, the process of breeding for IVs has been simplified a lot, so now is a better time than ever to learn how. It's become so much easier than it was in past generations. So if you were confused before, you might get the hang of it this time around. Today I'm going to do my absolute best to explain the IV breeding process in the simplest way possible, as well as covering how to breed for egg moves, natures, and abilities, so you can spend less time scratching your head and more time breeding for your perfect Pokemon. Much like I did with my EV training tutorial, I'm going to try and avoid overwhelming you with information, and just give a basic step-by-step tutorial of how the process of breeding goes. Again, this tutorial is going to assume you already know a decent amount about Pokemon. For example, what natures and effort values are, and what they do. For a little background info on the topic at hand though, IVs, or individual values, are invisible numbers that act as an individual Pokemon's genetic code. Every Pokemon is born with a permanent set of IVs, much like every living thing is born with DNA, genes, and alleles in real life. No amount of training is ever going to change these numbers once a Pokemon is born, so to influence them at all, you must breed for them. What do these numbers do exactly? Well, for each stat, every Pokemon has an individual value that ranges from 0 to 31, with 31 being the absolute best, or perfect IV. And for every IV a Pokemon has in a stat, that means they get an additional stat point at level 100. For a clear example of how these numbers affect stats, if a Pokemon is born with a 31 in Special Attack, it would be the equivalent of having an additional 124 EVs in that stat. If you've ever EV trained a Pokemon, and seen the difference EVs make on how a Pokemon performs in battle, you should have a better idea now of just how important IVs are. If all that was too complicated, just know that perfect IVs boost a Pokemon's stats by a lot. So they are important if you want your Pokemon to be able to compete in high levels of competitive play, or even just tougher endgame areas like the Battle Maison. Enough with the explanation of why though, let's move on to the how. Step 1. Gather materials. To IV breed, you'll need a couple things. First, you'll need a Destiny Knot. You can get one from the Babe in Solage City Hotel, or by battling Beauty Aime in Lumio City. Second, you'll need an Everstone. You can get one in Geosenge Town, or by catching Grappler, Geodude, or Roggenrola. They have a 5% chance that they'll be holding one, but this chance can be boosted if you have a Pokemon with Compound Eyes at the front of your party. Either way though, you can get one of each item just by playing through the game. So unless you accidentally traded yours away, odds are you already have these items. You'll also probably want a Pokemon with a Flame Body ability in the front of your party to make eggs hatch faster, preferably one that can also fly, like Volcarona or Fletchinder for convenience sake. And optionally you can use hatching O-Powers in the Oval Charm to make breeding and hatching eggs go by quicker. If you don't have either of those yet, don't worry. You can still breed for IVs in a reasonable amount of time without them. Step 2. Design your Pokemon. Now that you have everything you need, you should decide on what you want to breed for. Aside from IVs, there are a lot of factors to consider that you can manipulate through breeding, like nature, ability, and egg moves. Think of it as designing and customizing your own Pokemon to suit your team's needs. Since all these factors can be controlled through breeding, you can take care of all of them at once, to save time instead of breeding for each individually. It's really best to learn how to do it all at once, and it doesn't complicate the process too much more. The more variables you want to control, however, the more confusing it can get. For this reason, I recommend trying it for the first time with a starter Pokemon. Starters all only have one ability each, plus their hidden ability, and tend to have many natures that they can work with. This limits the amount of variables that can go wrong during this process, and increases the number of usable outcomes. In this example, I've decided I want to breed for a Charmander that has its hidden ability Solar Power, the egg move Dragon Pulse, and either a timid, modest, or naive nature. As for the IVs, really you only actually need perfect IVs in the main stats this Pokemon is going to utilize. For example, the stats you'd normally EV train them in. Since we're going for a special attacking Charmander, we could get a Charmander with perfect IVs and special attack and speed if we really wanted to and stop there, and it would still be a decent Pokemon. But perfect IVs in the defensive stats, like HP defense and special defense, can never hurt. It could be the difference between getting one hit KO'd and sticking around another turn for some Pokemon. Charmander is a fast Pokemon, so it'll go for max speed too. But if the Pokemon you want to breed for is slow, then you'll want to try to avoid giving it a high speed IV, so it can take advantage of moves like Trick Room. Since we want a fast special attacking Charmander, our ideal IV spread is going to be perfect HP, defense, special attack, special defense, and speed. Step 3. Pick your parents. Once you've figured out what you want your final result to be, you need to choose parents that can get you those results. Contrary to popular belief, you do not need a Ditto unless you're breeding genderless Pokemon. Though having one with high IVs is handy, anything in the same egg group will work. In Generation 6, both female and male parents could pass down hidden abilities and egg moves, so you don't necessarily need to worry about what gender parent has what. The only thing gender specific to keep in mind is that only female Pokemon will pass down their species. So since we want a Charmander, the mother we start out with needs to be part of the Charmander line. Luckily for me, I actually already got a pretty close to perfect solar power Charmander on Wonder Trade. But it was male, so I'll breed it with a Ditto until I get a female one that also has solar power. Wonder Trade is a pretty good place to collect parents for breeding, because often when people are done breeding, they give away their leftover Pokemon there. How can you tell if a Pokemon has perfect IVs? Talk to the judge in the Keelud City Pokemon Center and have him evaluate the Pokemon in question. If he points out any stats and says they can't be beat, this means that Pokemon has perfect IVs in those stats. I like to keep track of what stats they're perfect in by marking them. From left to right on the status screen, each symbol represents a different stat. HP, Attack, Defense, Special Attack, Special Defense, and Speed. And I fill in any symbol that represents a stat that Pokemon is perfect in. A lot of breeders follow this marking system, and it can be really useful for keeping track of your Pokemon stats. After half a box of Charmanders, a female one with solar power hatched, and a quick trip to the judge showed me she had perfect IVs in HP, Special Attack, and Special Defense. She's also timid, so we already have a parent with one of my possible desired natures, and the ability I want. Now that we have one parent, it's time to find the other. Since we want Dragon Pulse as an egg move, this limits the father to the Horsey line, Swablu line, Axio line, or Deanna line. Preferably, we want both parents to start out with at least a couple perfect IVs. So the best place to look for a father is the Friend Safari. Friend Safari Pokemon are guaranteed to have at least 2 perfect stats each, and it's the only place to catch Pokemon with their hidden abilities, so they're good Pokemon to start with if you're new to breeding. Since our mother came out with the nature we were looking for, we don't need to worry about what nature the father is. The only thing I'm looking for at this point is a father with perfect IVs in defense and speed, to make up for where the mother lacks. So we'll catch a bunch of male Fracture and check them with the judge until we find one with the stats we want. After about 20 minutes in the Friend Safari, I found a male Fracture with the exact stats I needed. Now all I have to do is level it up to 42 to give it Dragon Pulse, and both of my parents will be ready. Step 4. Start breeding. Finally, we're ready to begin the breeding process. Before we actually drop the parents off at the daycare though, we'll give them some items to hold. Since our female Charmander has the nature we want, we'll give it an Everstone to hold, to guarantee that the offspring are all born timid. And we'll give our male Haxorus a Destiny Knot, to guarantee that 5 IVs from either parent will be passed on to every egg. Unfortunately, whether or not the offspring are born with solar power is really just chance, but since Charmanders only have 2 abilities, it's about a 50% chance that it'll be born with its hidden ability. There's one other little thing to keep in mind during this process. If you've ever left a Pokemon at the daycare before, you'll know that often when you pick them up, they'll know different moves than they did before. This is probably going to happen when you're breeding too. But don't worry, as long as you don't take the parent with the egg move out of the daycare, it will still pass it on regardless of whether it has forgotten it or not. Once you take it out though, it can no longer pass the move on, so be careful. Now we'll drop our happy couple off at the daycare and start biking around. When the man outside the daycare turns around, you'll know an egg is ready for you to pick up. At this point, I like to bike back and forth along Route 7, picking up new eggs and hatching them until I have a full party. Then I fly to Keelud City and check the hatched Pokemon's IVs with the judge. None of the Pokemon in this first batch have more perfect IVs than their parents. So I'll put them all in the PC, fly back to Camp Fruit Town, and collect and hatch the next 5 eggs. This is where things get a little incestuous. A couple batches later, I finally get a male Charmander with solar power and Dragon Pulse that has perfect IVs in HP, defense, and speed. This means it has one better IV than the father I'm using now. Much like in real life, inbreeding narrows the gene pool, and while it's a bad thing for real-life creatures, for Pokemon that is how we achieve the desired results. The more the parents have overlapping perfect IVs, the better the chance that they will be passed on to the offspring. Now that we have a better male Charmander to work with, we'll fly back to Camp Fruit Town, pick up the Haxorus, move the Destiny Knot to the new Charmander, and deposit the Charmander in the daycare. The idea here is whenever you get a Pokemon with better IVs than one of the parents, you replace that parent with a new Pokemon, as long as one or both of the parents still have the hidden abilities and egg moves desired as well. Just make sure at any given time between the 2 parents they have perfect IVs and all the stats you want. You might get a Pokemon with 4 perfect IVs out of the blue, but if it doesn't cover the bases the opposite gender lacks, then you shouldn't switch it with the active parent. Out of sheer luck, I actually only had to switch parents this one time, and a few batches of eggs later, a male one hatched with perfect HP, defense, special attack, special defense, and speed. It also had solar power and Dragon Pulse, meaning it is the exact desired result I was looking for. Even starting with 2 parents that both had under 4 perfect IVs, it only took me roughly a box to get a perfect Charmander. Wasn't that simple? Step 5. Wonder Trade. So what do you do with all the Pokemon that hatched that weren't perfect? Wonder Trade them. Wonder Trade is not only a good way to clear out your box of unwanted Pokemon, but it's also a great resource for breeders, because you aren't the only one who's going to be Wonder Trading away the Pokemon left over after breeding. I've gotten several Pokemon with absolutely perfect IVs in every important stat on Wonder Trade. Trading breeding leftovers not only helps other trainers, but it can also help you out. Not to mention, you'll rack out quite a few Pokémiles by doing this, that you can spend on rare candies and other useful items at the Pokémile shop. Everybody wins. Well, that about wraps up this breeding tutorial. Once you've gotten the hang of it, you can move on to more complicated things, like breeding for specific hidden powers, or chain breeding for multiple egg moves. And remember, the more Pokemon you collect with perfect IVs, the more potential parents you'll have for future breeding projects. I hope this tutorial was helpful, and good luck getting your perfect Pokemon. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to click here to subscribe for more Pokemon videos. See ya!